Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be diving into spirituality.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
with a focus on pitfalls.
Oh. Ooh.
And we've got a stack of academic papers, articles,
All right.
and even some social media posts,
Interesting.
all centered around
Okay.
cult dynamics and specific organizations.
I see.
And by the end of this deep dive,
Okay.
you'll be able to spot those red flags and protect yourself on your spiritual journey.
It's like we're giving you a spiritual safety kit.
Yeah.
Knowledge is your best defense against manipulation.
So let's jump right in.
Right.
Our first discussion point is this idea of fossilization of spiritual teachings. You ever heard of that?
Oh, yeah. It's a fascinating concept. Imagine a river of wisdom that over time becomes stagnant.
I see.
The once vibrant teachings become rigid, dogmatic systems, more focused on rules and rituals than genuine understanding.
So it's not necessarily that the original teachings were bad.
Right.
But they lost their mojo along the way.
Precisely.
Okay.
The emphasis shifts from inner transformation to outward conformity.
Okay.
Think strict adherence to rituals, specific clothing, or even dietary restrictions that become more important than actual personal growth.
So how can someone tell if a group is more about rules than actual transformation? I mean, everyone wants to feel like they belong.
You're right. That sense of belonging is a powerful draw. But here's a key insight. A red flag is when a group focuses more on those external rituals than on personal growth.
Okay.
Look for an emphasis on questioning, self-reflection, and genuine inner work. If it feels more like a rule book than a journey of self-discovery, that's a warning sign.
Okay, so outward appearances can be deceiving. It's like that saying, you can't judge a book by its cover. Which leads us to our next point.
Okay.
The danger of mistaking external piety or virtuous actions for true inner attainment.
Oh, yeah.
I think we've all seen that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's easy to assume that someone who appears devout or engages in lots of virtuous actions is spiritually advanced. But true spiritual growth is an internal process.
It's like saying that someone who looks great in a yoga pose is automatically enlightened.
It's not about the outward performance.
Right.
It's about the inner transformation.
Yeah.
And sometimes these external practices can actually become a way to mask a lack of genuine depth.
Oh,
it's a way of seeking validation or fitting in without doing the real work.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap? I mean, we don't want to be cynical.
Right.
And assume everyone's faking it.
Yeah.
But we also don't want to be naive.
Yeah, you're spot on. It's about finding that balance.
Right.
Look beyond the surface.
Are they walking their talk?
Yeah.
Do their actions match their words? And most importantly, trust your gut.
Okay.
If something feels off, it probably is.
Okay. That's helpful. Don't just judge a book by its cover, right?
Right.
Speaking of things that can be misleading, our next topic explores the darker side of some spiritual systems. Training, manipulation, and the power of repetition.
Okay. This is where things get a bit more intense.
Right.
Some systems rely heavily on conditioning their followers to respond automatically, suppressing intuition and independent thought.
Wow.
Think repetitive chanting rituals or even specific physical exercises that, while potentially beneficial in some contexts, can be used to create a sort of trance-like state.
So it's almost like brainwashing.
Well, that might be a bit strong.
Okay.
But there are definitely parallels.
Okay.
The goal is often to create a sense of dependence on the group and the leader.
Right.
They encourage unquestioning obedience by repeating specific phrases, beliefs, or practices.
One of our sources mentioned a quote. Leaders of thought and groupings always seek the most effective methods of mass organization. It seems harmless enough on the surface, but
it's about control. They simplify teachings and beliefs so that they can control large groups of people more easily.
Right.
It takes away your power to think critically and question what's being presented.
That's scary. Especially when you consider that many people turn to spirituality for comfort and reassurance. They're looking for answers.
Exactly. And that vulnerability can be exploited. Instead of finding genuine inner peace, they become reliant on the group for their sense of self-worth and belonging.
It's a reminder that we need to be aware of these tactics.
Right.
Repetition and ritual can be powerful tools for transformation.
Yes.
But they can also be misused. Absolutely. A healthy spiritual path encourages critical thinking, questioning, and self-discovery.
And this idea of control through oversimplification takes us to our next point,
Okay.
which is how the essence of spiritual teachings can be twisted and fragmented.
Right.
What's that all about?
It's like taking a complex machine and trying to operate it by focusing on just one tiny component. You might get a small result, but you're missing the bigger picture.
So it's about taking teachings out of context and using them to
Exactly.
serve a specific agenda.
We see this with the example of yoga in our sources. While yoga postures can be beneficial for physical well-being, they were originally linked to a much deeper cosmic understanding of the self and the universe. But that deeper meaning often gets lost in modern interpretations.
So it's not that the postures themselves are bad.
Right.
It's that they're being used for a different purpose than originally intended.
Precisely. And
Yeah.
that's just one example. It happens with all sorts of spiritual practices and teachings. They're simplified, repackaged, and marketed in a way that often misses the original depth and complexity.
One of the sources used a great analogy. They said, if you play with something complex, treating it as if it were simple, it will not operate to its real capacity.
Oh.
It seems like that applies to just about anything in life.
You're absolutely right. Whether it's spirituality, science, or art, real mastery requires a deep dive, not just skimming the surface. And that's what we're doing here today, taking a deep dive into the complexities of spiritual teachings to help you avoid those pitfalls.
Okay, so we've talked about fossilization, mistaking external piety for inner growth, and the dangers of manipulation and simplification.
Right.
What's next?
Now let's talk about something often associated with cults. The tendency to blindly imitate past teachers without understanding the principle of adaptation.
So it's not enough to just follow the teachings
Yeah.
of a master from 100 years ago.
Exactly.
Things have changed, haven't they?
The world is constantly evolving, and spiritual teachings need to adapt to the changing times and the needs of individuals.
Okay.
Blindly copying practices without understanding their underlying principles
Right.
can be not only ineffective, but also potentially harmful.
It's like trying to use an outdated map
A perfect analogy.
to navigate a new city. You're likely to get lost.
Authentic spiritual schools understand this. They emphasize the importance of individual needs and adapt their teachings accordingly.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Absolutely not. And this is where we see a clear distinction between authentic spiritual paths and those that lean towards being cults.
Right.
Cults often apply practices en masse, regardless of whether they resonate with the individual or if they're even ready for them.
That sounds dangerous.
It can be.
Yeah.
It can lead to a dangerous fixation on specific techniques or rituals, losing sight of the bigger picture and the true purpose of spiritual growth.
Okay. So how do we know if a teacher or a group is promoting that kind of blind imitation? What are the red flags?
That's a great question, and it leads us perfectly into our next topic, recognizing the signs of a bogus teacher.
Let's get into that. But first, a quick message from our sponsors. We'll be right back.
And we're back diving deeper into the world of spirituality and exploring those potential pitfalls.
Right.
Before the break, we were about to uncover the red flags of a bogus teacher. What should we be looking out for?
Well, it all comes down to authenticity and intention.
Okay.
A genuine teacher
Right.
is focused on helping their students grow and evolve. They create a learning environment based on honesty, respect, and mutual trust.
So what are the telltale signs that a teacher might not have the student's best interests at heart?
One of the biggest red flags is a lack of transparency.
Okay.
They may try to mystify the teachings, making them seem more complex or esoteric than they really are.
Right.
It's all about maintaining their position of power and control. It's like the wizard behind the curtain, right?
When he
Once you
closes
pull back the
it.
curtain, it's all smoke and mirrors.
They might also rely on intimidation or manipulation tactics
Wow.
to keep their followers in line.
Okay.
They might use guilt, shame, or even threats to discourage questioning or dissent.
That's disturbing. It's almost like they're preying on people's insecurities and vulnerabilities.
Unfortunately, that's often the case. And here's another red flag.
Right.
A genuine teacher doesn't need to impress or boast about their accomplishments.
Right.
They let their actions and the fruits of their teachings speak for themselves.
So if someone is constantly name-dropping
Yeah.
or highlighting their spiritual achievements, that's a sign to be wary.
Absolutely. True humility speaks volumes.
Okay.
And remember, a genuine teacher will always encourage their students to think for themselves, to question, and to explore different perspectives.
It seems like there are a lot of potential traps out there.
Yeah.
It can feel overwhelming.
It's true. And unfortunately, there's another alarming trend.
Oh,
More and more unqualified individuals
I see.
are setting themselves up as spiritual teachers, often preying on people who are seeking guidance and connection.
So how do we protect ourselves? How can we distinguish between a true teacher and someone who's just in it for the power or the money?
It's all about discernment.
Okay.
Do your research, ask questions,
Right.
and trust your intuition.
Okay.
Does this teacher embody the qualities they're teaching? Do their actions align with their words?
And if something feels off, don't be afraid to walk away.
Absolutely. You are in control of your spiritual journey. No one else.
Okay. I'm starting to get the picture.
Good.
But it helps to see these concepts in action.
Right.
Can we dive into a real-life example?
Of course. Let's examine the case of Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation,
Okay.
which has been accused of exhibiting some of the red flags we've been discussing.
And just to be clear, these are allegations.
Yes.
And Butler and his followers have denied any wrongdoing.
Correct.
We're simply using this case as an illustration.
Precisely. We want to present the information objectively and let you draw your own conclusions.
So what's the story here?
Chris Butler, also known as Jagadguru Siddhaswarupananda Paramahamsa,
Okay.
founded the Science of Identity Foundation in the 1970s.
I see.
The group blends elements of Hinduism, yoga, and Western philosophy.
And what are the specific allegations against Butler and the organization?
Well, former members and critics have accused the group of being a cult,
Right.
alleging practices of manipulation, exploitation, and even abuse.
Can you give us some concrete examples?
Our sources provide several interesting details.
Okay.
For instance, there's mention of a list of 533 names of Butler's disciples, with the claim that 99% of them had never contributed to a political campaign before joining the group.
Interesting.
This raises questions about potential undue influence and control.
That's interesting. It sounds like there might have been a push to get involved in politics.
There are also accounts of members being pressured to donate large sums of money
Oh, wow.
to the organization or to work long hours without pay.
That definitely raises a red flag.
And perhaps even more concerning is the story of Cassia,
Okay.
a young woman who joined the group.
Uh-huh.
She became increasingly isolated from her family and friends,
Right.
expressing fear and paranoia before her untimely death.
That's tragic. It makes you wonder about the psychological impact of being part of this group.
Another point of contention is the allegation that Butler, who had taken vows of renunciation, broke those vows by marrying a former student.
I see.
This contradicted his teachings and spiritual authority.
So there's a sense of hypocrisy there.
Many saw it that way. And finally, let's look at Butler's teachings themselves.
Okay.
He emphasizes surrendering to Krishna while feeling lower than the straw in the street.
That's a pretty intense image.
It is. And while the concept of surrender is central to many spiritual traditions,
Right.
it's often misunderstood.
Okay.
True surrender is about aligning your will with a higher purpose, not about blind obedience or giving up your personal power.
So how do we differentiate between healthy surrender and a situation where it's being used to manipulate and control?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer.
Right.
But here's a key distinction.
Okay.
Authentic spiritual growth involves developing a balanced sense of self. It's not about seeing yourself as inherently bad or unworthy, but rather about recognizing your full potential, both the light and the shadow.
So it's about wholeness, not self-negation.
Exactly. And that requires critical thinking, self-awareness, and a willingness to question, even when it's uncomfortable.
Okay, that gives me a lot to think about. As we examine this case study, it's important to remember that we're not here to judge or condemn. We're simply using it as a lens through which to understand the complexities of spiritual dynamics
Exactly.
and the potential for manipulation.
And remember, our goal is to equip you with the knowledge and tools to discern authentic spiritual paths and protect yourself from harm.
So with that in mind, what are some key takeaways from the Science of Identity Foundation case? What does it teach us about the dangers we've been discussing?
It highlights the importance of being wary of groups that demand unquestioning obedience, isolate members from their support systems, or promote a leader as an infallible guru.
I see.
It's also a stark reminder to be mindful of financial exploitation
Right.
and to critically examine teachings that encourage feelings of worthlessness or self-deprecation.
That's a lot to take in. It's a bit unsettling, to be honest.
It is. But remember, knowledge is power.
Yeah.
The more we understand these dynamics,
Right.
the better equipped we are to navigate the spiritual landscape safely and make choices that align with our values and well-being.
Okay, so we've explored the red flags of a bogus teacher.
Right?
And delved into a case study that brought those concepts to life. But how do we apply this knowledge to our own spiritual journeys? How do we protect ourselves?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it leads us perfectly into our next section.
Right.
Practical tips for navigating the spiritual path safely and with discernment.
So we've covered a lot of ground.
Right.
From fossilized teachings to the red flags of a bogus teacher. But how do we actually apply this knowledge in our own lives? How can we make sure we're on an authentic path?
Well, it's all about discernment.
Okay.
Being a spiritual detective in a way.
Right.
Our sources have some great tips to help you with that.
Okay.
The first is to compare. Don't just settle for the first spiritual path or teacher that comes your way.
Right.
Shop around a bit.
Okay. So do your research.
It's
kind of like how you wouldn't buy the first car you see on the lot, right?
Explore different traditions, read their texts, talk to practitioners,
Right.
Get a feel for what resonates with you, what feels authentic.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And our sources also highlighted the importance of looking at the leader's life, not just their words.
Yes.
Do they walk their talk?
Actions speak louder than words,
Right.
especially in the spiritual realm. If a teacher preaches humility but lives a lavish lifestyle,
Right.
or talks about compassion while treating others poorly, that's a major red flag.
So look for consistency. And what about those situations where something just feels off, even if you can't put your finger on it?
Trust your intuition.
Okay.
That gut feeling is often a warning system.
Right.
If a group or a teacher makes you feel pressured, uncomfortable, or like you have to suppress your own doubts, that's a sign to proceed with caution.
It's almost like our intuition is our internal compass.
Exactly. It's that inner voice that helps guide us towards what's truly right for us. And remember, seek diverse perspectives.
Okay.
Talk to people from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Read widely, and don't be afraid to challenge your own assumptions.
That reminds me of something we touched on earlier. That idea of feeling lower than the straw in the street as a prerequisite for spiritual surrender.
Right.
I'm still wrestling with that one.
Yeah.
It seems a bit extreme, don't you think?
It's certainly a powerful image.
Yeah.
And while humility is important on the spiritual path,
Right.
it shouldn't come at the expense of your self-worth. True surrender is about aligning with a higher purpose,
Right.
not about diminishing yourself.
So how can we tell the difference? How do we know if we're truly surrendering to something greater or if we're being manipulated into a state of submission?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
But here's a key distinction. Authentic spiritual growth involves developing a balanced sense of self. It's not about seeing yourself as inherently bad or unworthy, but rather about recognizing your full potential.
Okay.
Both the light and the shadow.
So it's about wholeness, not self-negation.
Exactly.
Right.
And that requires critical thinking, self-awareness, and a willingness to question, even when it's uncomfortable.
Okay. That gives me a lot to think about. As we wrap up this deep dive, is there one final piece of advice you'd give to our listeners who are navigating their own spiritual journeys?
Remember that you are ultimately in control. You have the power to choose your path.
Right.
To ask questions, and to walk away from any situation that doesn't feel right.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to trust your instincts and to seek out genuine guidance from those who embody the qualities you aspire to cultivate.
That's powerful advice. So for those of you listening, remember the spiritual path can be a profound journey of self-discovery and transformation. But it's important to approach it with both an open mind and a healthy dose of skepticism.
Exactly.
Do your research, trust your intuition, and never be afraid to question.
And remember, the true essence of spirituality lies in the pursuit of wisdom, compassion, and connection, not in blind obedience or the surrender of your personal power.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and empowering. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.